Welcome back, casual gardeners. In part one of my spring planting videos, you watched me finish planting this bed with all that garlic in it and plant in this bed with the pea trellis. So that means I only have 4 beds left to plant, and I'm not completely planting all of the beds, and some of the beds are quite simple to plant and all of the beds are already made. So follow along as I plant some onions, some greens, some corn salad, whatever that is, right? And some carrots in and among where my summer plantings are going to go. This is a great time to be planting because in a few days, a storm front is going to move through and thoroughly water the garden for me. So I'm going to be sticking with seeds that will germinate well in the cool. We're going to start with this bed. You can see that it's already been made and I've left my irrigation system pulled back. Right here, this is where I'm going to leave allowance for cucumbers. So I'm going to have a couple of cucumber plants over on this end. Now over here, I'm going to leave a big space allowance because summer squash grows pretty fast once it gets going. I'm going to plant a summer squash here. So I don't want to put anything here. Right here, I'm going to plant carrots and onions. I was just going to devote this space to carrots, but it turns out I don't really have actually a ton of carrot seeds. Hi, I'm Future Dustin editing this video. And yeah, I see that shape. It wasn't on purpose, but if it makes you happy, you're welcome. I'll be popping in every now and then to add comments and fill in any information gaps that, past Dustin forgot to fill in. And then this area right here is also going to be for onions. I'm just going to squeeze onions in everywhere I can. This is just all onions here. There are several ways to grow onions, and it's really all a matter of preference. I prefer to grow from seed because onions are cheap at the grocery store and I get more bang for my buck from seeds. And hopefully that's going to leave enough space for my summer crops to mature throughout the season and take up a bunch of space, but also I can utilize this bed a little bit more efficiently in the meantime. Now, when you're growing onions from seed the way I am, you can usually get away with planting them as soon as the soil is workable. So that means probably I could have done this about a week and a half ago. But for Logan, the Utah State University Extension says that the best time to plant onions is in late March. So I'm still kind of on schedule. We're going to see how it goes. I'm going to break this space up into 2 long rows for onions. If you're growing onions from seed, you may decide to start them early indoors and then transplant them out. That is going to get you slightly bigger onions. It's going to knock a few weeks off your, it's going to add a few weeks to your growing season. You are going to also have to spend time hardening them off, and you're going to have to spend space inside your home to, start your onions. So those are things that I'm not super excited about, and I don't feel like it's worth the effort from me. But if you like to start your onions indoors, you do you. I've got 2 kinds of onions that I can plant. I think this side I'm going to devote entirely to yellow onions. These are from Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds. And you want to wind up with spacing of about 4 inches. I'm going to start my seeds a little bit closer than that and thin them as they mature because, gosh, young onions can be really yummy. You'll also get bigger onions if you fertilize every 3 or 4 weeks with a high nitrogen fertilizer just as they're doing the leafy part of their growth. As soon as they start to bulb out, you need to stop fertilizing your onions. Now for that other side over there, I'm going to do basically the same thing, 2 long rows, but we'll be doing these red onions, these Cabernet alliums from Botanical Interests. And just a quick pro tip, when you're opening up your onions, you might want to make sure you tear the package in such a way that you do not obscure the sell-by date. Ooh, not a ton of onions in here. So I might want to come back with more yellow onions for the other row. Red onions need the same care as any other kind of onion. Whichever kind of onion you decide to grow, make sure that it is going to get between 80 and 100 full 8-hour days of sun in its growing season, because it's going to need that to form a nice bulb for you. Each of those onion layers comes from leaf formation. So every leaf that your onion grows is another layer on your onion, and more layers means a bigger onion until eventually it's an ogre. So now, just to mix things up, I want these lines to go this way. I want to do at least one row of these old turnip seeds. These were packaged for 2020, so wish me luck. Turnip seeds have an average shelf life of about 3 years. After that time, their germination rate is going to start to go down and be more erratic. Then, continuing the theme of old seeds, in go these black nebula carrot seeds. Carrot seeds also have a seed viability of about 3 years. The black nebula seeds are from 2019, so I'm probably going to see reduced viability, a lower germination rate, and more weird plants. But it's worth trying because black nebula carrots are so purple. They will turn whatever food you put them in purple. They will turn your hands purple. They will turn your cutting board purple. They'll turn your sink purple when you wash them. I got these coral carrots for free from Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds. They send you free seeds. Oh, not a lot. Carrots can be direct sown several weeks before last frost. They do not like being transplanted, so do not waste your money on carrot transplants from a nursery. It's just, you're gonna be sad. With carrots, it's especially important to keep your planting bed moist throughout their germination period, which can be as long as 2 weeks. So that's the tricky part. The trickiest thing about growing carrots is keeping them moist until they germinate. Some people say that if you plant your carrots with onions, the odors, the oils and odors of the onions are going to confuse carrot flies and you won't struggle with carrot fly as much. But you can find people that say just about anything. Plants are not going to release their chemicals that are in their leaves unless you damage their leaves. And if you're like me, you try not to do that on purpose. If there's that benefit, great, but more than likely, that's just something that sounded cool and doesn't really work. This bed is entirely dedicated to tomatoes in terms of summer crops, and I'm going to grow 8 tomato plants in this 8-foot long bed. And I found that that is a spacing that I can manage the way I trellis my tomatoes. I do want to squeeze some more onions in. So what I'm going to do in this bed is I'm just going to put 2 rows of onions lengthwise down the entire bed. That's going to be some more of these yellow onions that I have tons of seeds for. Onion seeds have really poor viability. Do not bother saving your 2024 onion seeds for 2025 because they're not going to grow well for you. Onions can take 7 to 10 days to germinate at about 70 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 21 degrees Celsius. Cooler temperatures are going to lead to slower germination, so I expect them to take longer as I've planted them out in my garden because it's still dropping down to about freezing at night here in Logan, Utah. I often like to fill a bed that I'm going to plant tomatoes in later with lettuce. And it's not a bad idea to do that because then you can just crop out a bunch of lettuce and cut some holes in the lettuce bed for when it's time to transplant in some tomatoes. But I have a whole bed dedicated to greens, and I already know that that's going to be enough that I have to share a lot of greens with my friends and neighbors. So I'm going to just have these 2 rows of onions and call it done. It's kind of a waste of space. I'm having a first world problem. This is the bed in part 1 that I showed you how I make a bed. I've gone ahead and pulled my irrigation system back again, so it's just easier to work with. And this bed is going to be dedicated. Half of it is all kohlrabi, because kohlrabi is my favorite brassica. And if you don't agree, more for me. So this half is all kohlrabi, and this half is going to house 6 pepper plants later in the season. And again, this is a bed that I could fill with some spring crops if I did not have a wealth of space as my first world problem. So I'm going to leave this half pretty much empty. I am going to do rows of onions down the sides, because God, onions are so fun to grow. If you haven't grown onions, make some space for onions next spring. It's just so fun. And it's relatively easy to have success with them as long as you provide enough room and light for your onions to grow. Let me know in the comments if you're a broadcast planter. If you're looking at me making all these rows and you're like, dude, you know the seeds don't care if you put them in rows. You could just sprinkle them where you want them and they'll work just as well. Because you're right, that's true. But there is one advantage to row planting that I just don't have with broadcast planting, and that is that weeds don't grow in rows. And so if I have a weed coming up that looks a lot like what I just planted, and it's not in one of my rows, I know right away it's a weed, and I don't have to play identification shenanigans, and I can just pull it out. So that's why I've come to love rows. I used to be more of a chaotic gardener. Kohlrabi is a member of the Brassica family, or the cabbage family. In fact, it is the exact same species as cabbage, even though it looks very different. The plant itself, the part you primarily eat, is this weird bulb formation that happens on the stem. You're actually eating the stem of this plant. The leaves are edible. Younger leaves are more edible. Older leaves, you're going to want to blanch them before you try to eat them because they get tough. Now I've got 3 kinds of kohlrabi I'm planting. I've got super schmaltz, or giant white kohlrabi. This one, under ideal circumstances, can get as big as your head. I've bought a kohlrabi as big as my head. That's a lot of kohlrabi. I've got delicacy white kohlrabi. This is a smaller variety that you would harvest at about the size of a golf ball. And I've got some purple Vienna seeds. Those 2 are both from Baker Creek. This is from Eden Brothers. These are a little bit older, I think, but I wasn't careful not to rip off the sell-by date on these seeds, so we're going to give them a try and see how they go. Kohlrabi seeds can usually keep for about 5 years, so I'm not worried about some of my older seeds. Space your smaller kohlrabi varieties at about 6 inches. This is to leave room for the leaves mostly. And those ones you're going to harvest when they're between the size of a golf ball and a softball. Larger varieties will, of course, need more room, and you may end up spacing those up to a foot apart. Even though kohlrabi looks like a root crop, it is technically a leafy crop, so it will respond well to nitrogen fertilizer. Now you might have noticed that I didn't really worry about spacing within the rows, and you might be wondering why. Shouldn't I account for the adult sizes of these plants? Well, no. Kohlrabi is edible at every stage of its life cycle. When they just come up, you have basically broccoli microgreens. As they mature, you can still harvest them young once they just start to bulb up. You can eat the leaves, the young tender leaves. Older leaves you can blanch, and I like to make sog with them. And then once they're mature, everything that you've thinned out leaves room for the mature plants at the mature size. Don't sweat it. Just be casual in your garden. That's the whole point of this channel. This is the last bed that I'm going to be planting this for spring crops, and this is entirely a spring bed. So I'm not going to make allowances for any other crop. This is what this bed is all about. And the reason I've chosen this bed for spring crops, and actually fall crops as well, is that it's closest to my big stupid maple tree, and it gets shade, especially in the summer. If you're growing spring crops and you don't want them to bolt, that's a good thing. So I'm taking advantage of the conditions where I'm growing to grow better. So looking at this bed, I've got about 40 row feet that I'm going to be growing just greens in. So that's a lot of greens. It's going to be crazy, and I'm going to grow a mix of things. Super excited to try cilantro If it goes to seed, it's coriander. So it's a twofer. Cilantro does like sun, so I'm going to put it at the front end of the bed where it doesn't get quite as shaded. Cilantro germinates in about 5 to 10 days at about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. It prefers cooler germination temperatures, and the seeds are viable for at least 5 years. Now you might think of cilantro as a summer crop because it goes in salsa and Mexican food, right? But it actually doesn't like growing in the heat. It will bolt like you wouldn't believe. And it's surprisingly cold tolerant. Cilantro is a spring crop. Grow it in the spring. So in between these 2 rows of cilantro, I'm going to grow some mache from Eden Brothers. Mache is also known as corn salad. I did not succeed with it last time I planted it because I planted it too late in the season. So we're going to do a spring planting of mache and see if I can find out what it tastes like. This is an experimental crop. I've never tried it before, so I'm just giving it the 1 row. That way if I hate it, I haven't, committed. Moving deeper into the shade, this looks like a job for arugula, also called rocket. And last fall when I tried to grow it, I learned that it's called rocket because it just blasts off. It's also got some of the smallest seeds that you will put in your garden. Oh goodness, good luck spacing that well. Arugula prefers moist, well-draining soil that is higher in nitrogen. It is really appropriate to interplant with lettuce because they're both very thirsty crops. If you're harvesting younger leaves, you can space as close as 3 inches, and that is going to help shade out weeds in your garden, which is always a plus. In between my arugulas, let's drop in some spinach, because a variety of greens just makes me happier. Spinach is another crop that likes moist, fertile soil. And so it's another one that's great for interplanting with lettuce. Space it closer together if you're harvesting younger leaves. Again, closer spacing chokes out weeds. It's a win-win. I drop in some black-seeded Simpson lettuce. It is one of my favorite varieties. It has beautiful lime green leaves. I tend to favor loose leaf lettuce varieties because you can start harvesting your lettuce as soon as you've got about 5 true leaves, and you can just come back again and again until it bolts. If something goes wrong before your lettuce is fully mature, with loose leaf lettuce you're more likely to have at least gotten something. Whereas with heading lettuce, if something goes wrong before it's mature and formed a head, you've lost your whole crop. I'm going to try these Burgundy Delight seeds from Burpee. They're for 2021, so wish me luck. Lettuce seeds are usually good for about 5 years, 4 or 5 years, so it's probably fine. The recommended spacing for loose leaf lettuce is about 4 to 6 inches. Heading lettuce may require more space. Spacing your plants close together, again, helps choke out weeds. I'm going to put in a row of tatsoi, which is not lettuce, but it's going to, add to the variety. Tatsoi is related to mustard and has a similar flavor to mustard greens. You can thin it gradually as it matures. Your target for mature tatsoi is about 8-inch spacing. We'll finish up with this Lunix lettuce. Hey, do you prefer loose leaf or heading lettuce? Let me know in the comments down there and tell me why you think so. Okay, now that I've got everything in, I'm going to cover it up for good soil contact and water it in. All of the seeds in this bed should be planted no deeper than about 1/4 inch. Some lettuce varieties need sunlight for germination and won't grow if you plant them too deep. We did it! We got through the rest of my spring bed planting. And hopefully it was at least mildly entertaining for you. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions about the varieties of seeds that you saw me plant today. I'm going to link in the description to part 1 if you're curious to see how I go about making my beds. It's pretty stinking easy. Thank you for joining me here in my garden today. I hope you have a wonderful time in your own.